Okay, so you're going to use this video to complete sections 2 and 3 of your guided notes. Now, the people who legislate make laws, as we talked about quite a bit in our last video, and they work here at the Capitol building. And on one side of the building is the House of Representatives, and on the other is the Senate. We are going to break down each of these sections in section 2 and 3 of your guided notes, just as the Founding Fathers did in the actual Constitution. Now, we're going to start with the House of Representatives. The House of Representatives is made up of members that are elected every 2 years. Every 2 years, there are elections held to re-elect the House of Representatives members. And there are no term limits in the House of Representatives. Now, the requirements to run for the House of Representatives include you having to be at least 25 years old. That is the youngest you would have to be an elected representative in our government, 25 years old. This year, they elected the first representative who actually is 25 years old. Now, the second requirement is that they have to be an American citizen for at least 7 years. Notice, they do not have to be born here in order to work in the House of Representatives. And the third requirement is that they must be a resident of the state that they represent. In other words, if I wanted to represent Michigan, I would have to live there. That makes sense. Why? So that those people understand the needs of Michiganians? I never know that word. Now, the third box down here. There are a total of 435 representatives in the House. That's a lot of people, and that is the absolute max. The 435 representatives are allocated, as you might remember, based on population, and we'll talk more about that in just a second. Now, a little bit more about the House of Representatives. Leadership of the House of Representatives is led by somebody called the Speaker of the House. The Speaker of the House is in charge of essentially being the referee of the House of Representatives. Our current Speaker of the House is a woman named Nancy Pelosi. Now, a new term of Congress will come into session probably, in early January, and with that, they do discuss possibly electing a new Speaker of the House. We'll see what happens. Most likely Nancy Pelosi will stay in her place as Speaker of the House, but you've definitely heard of her in recent years, especially with regards to coronavirus and impeachment. Her name comes up a lot. But if you break it down to a smaller scale, here are our current Illinois representatives. We live in the 9th District of Illinois, and our current representative is a woman named Jan Schakowsky, and she has been our representative since 1999. So 20 years plus, all right? Now, in Illinois in total, there are 18. That's Jan Schakowsky right there. This is Nancy Pelosi, in case you're wondering. So there are 435 total people there. Nancy Pelosi is in charge, but specifically representing us here in District 9, the 9th District of Illinois, is Jan Schakowsky, and there she is. I know they kind of look alike too. All right, so you should be filling in your notes with this video. Now, a little bit about the House of Representatives. I mentioned that it is based on population. This is a congressional map, the current congressional map of Illinois. I'm sorry, there's a glare right in the middle. You'll notice that the areas that are more populated up by Chicago are smaller. That's because the population is much more concentrated in that area, and because it's more concentrated, the districts are physically, or by area, smaller. But once you get to the southern portions of our state, and maybe if you've traveled south, I know recently I made a trip, not recently, before COVID I made a trip to St. Louis for a wedding, you may have noticed that it's a lot more rural, a lot more spread out. So that's why districts like District 15 are much larger in size, or even District 17 is much larger in size, while District 9, here we are, is much smaller in size. They have similar amounts of people there, but they are different physically by area in size. Okay. Now, every 10 years there's a census that is done that counts the number of people in our country. This year we are just concluding a census that will help determine the number of representatives in every state. Those 435 people are distributed, as well as our electoral votes, as we know, throughout the country based on population. So if Illinois loses people, which it potentially is going to, it might lose representatives. which means this number could go from 18 total in Illinois down to 16 or 17. Now, there are some states that are gaining population, like Texas. Texas has some of the the fastest growing cities in our country. Texas is going to see an increase in population, therefore an increase in representation. Again, it ebbs and flows as population changes. All right, the second component here is the Senate. The Senate I like to think of as the varsity team, while I think of the House of Representatives more as like the JV team, both of which have a ton of influence. The Senate is a little bit different than the House of Representatives, so we're going to fill in that table in our guided notes. Now, members of the Senate are elected every 6 years. So remember I said varsity team. They have a longer term. They serve 6, while the House of Representatives, remember, is 2. There are no term limits in the Senate, and actually no talking limits. We'll talk about that later. And there are 3 requirements. They're sort of a step up from the House of Representatives in requirements, I suppose. You have to be 30 years old to run for the Senate. You have to be an American citizen for 9 years. And again, you have to be a resident of the state that you represent. Now, because there are, as we know from our Great Compromise, 2 senators per state, we know that there are a total of 100 in Congress. So take a second, make sure you copy down these notes. You can pause this too. All right, now, leadership in the Senate is a little bit different. The president of the Senate is actually the current vice president of the country. Right now, our current vice president is Mike Pence. Our current Illinois senators are, there's Mike Pence, by the way, in case you haven't seen him, I'm sure you have, Dick Durbin, who was elected in 1997, as well as Tammy Duckworth, who was elected in 2017, both of which are Democrats representing us in the Senate. And again, it's 2 per state. You'll notice that Dick Durbin has been an incumbent, meaning that he has been in power for much longer, while Tammy Duckworth has been in power for much less time. Dick Durbin was actually a big part of the impeachment hearings, and you may have seen him on TV. If you watch C-SPAN, like Mrs. Lopez watches C-SPAN sometimes, you may see him on there. He often gets interviewed on the news. Anyway, now Tammy Duckworth does as well, and actually at one point she was being discussed as a possible VP candidate for Joe Biden. Now, with all that being said, oh, and there's Tammy Duckworth, I'm sorry. This is the makeup of Congress, the House and the Senate.